Hello, welcome. I'm Professor Sean Tavalia, Academic Chair of Physical Science at Suffolk County Community College and founding member of the board of Hampton Observatory. For those of you not familiar with our organizations, the Hamptons Observatory was founded over 20 years ago with a mission to promote an understanding and appreciation for science through free quality educational programs. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by Suffolk County Community College's NSF-sponsored iSuccess program, a program that provides scholarships and extracurricular activities for students enrolled in STEM majors. Although this event is free, it could not be possible without the generous donations from people like you. For more information on how you can donate to ensure these programs continue, please visit our website. If tonight's presentation inspires you to learn more, please consider enrolling in one of the many traditional and online astronomy courses offered at Suffolk County Community College. As we begin tonight's presentation, I ask that you keep your microphones muted, but please feel free to post questions in the chat. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll do our best to address all questions. Tonight's speaker has been a NASA volunteer since 1997 and a NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador since 2004. He has a degree in electrical engineering and has worked as a medical imaging engineer for 48 years. He's certified by NASA to handle lunar samples, is a science correspondent for a local Connecticut radio station, produces astronomy and space mission radio shows and podcasts. He's an amateur astronomer and telescope maker with a passion for educating the public about science and astronomy. Please join me in welcoming Andy Poniros. Andy, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you very much for the very nice introduction, Sean. And thanks for everybody for coming, and I should say coming, being on Zoom. Yeah, this is of course I'm a solar system ambassador. I've been doing this for quite some time, and I get the opportunity to bring this to everyone. And this is basically a personal journey that I'm talking about today. I'm going to tell you about the some of the 400,000 people that made it possible for us to go to the moon and all the Apollo programs, and of course from Gemini and Mercury through. It all started when I was a little kid. This is a couple years after that, but my mom lets me stay home from school to see John. I asked her, can I see John Glenn's flight today, his mission? Yeah, can I stay? Yeah. I'm like, whoa, yeah, this is great. So amazing, to see. And we could see it basically as it happened. They had a problem with what was actually a sensor. They thought that his heat shield was going to separate and he would burn up into the atmosphere. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But again, I got to see it. He was, as NASA had done many times, has been found a workaround, and he came down and I got to see it, which was really great. Mom said yes. And the next thing that really etched my mind is basically, is Ed White's spacewalk. I was in art class, and my teacher said to me, can you do any, Andy, this is very nice, your art, but can you do anything other than Gemini capsules? And I said, no, I can't. But so that's how I got started. And it's been a love affair for me ever since. And I've got the opportunity through NASA, the radio station, WPKN, Space Fest, to meet some of these people and get to know them and share this with you. So, and today, of course, is the 50th anniversary of the docking of Apollo-Soyuz, and these are the astronauts and cosmonauts involved here. You can see that at the top we've got Tom Stafford, Alexei Leonov in the back. He's the first human to walk in space, and of course Deke Slayton down bottom of the left, Vance Brand, and Valery Kubasov. And the only living member right now is Vance Brand. I was fortunate enough to interview him and talk to him today. He's doing fine, 94 years old. And again, I feel blessed to be able to tell this stuff to you and talk to him as well. And so I'll tell you a little bit about each person. Alexei Leonov was the first, again, human to walk in space. He had a problem, and as most early spacewalkers did, and almost died. His suit became expanded. Because of the zero gravity and coldness of space, He had to relieve the pressure in his suit to get back in, and almost didn't make it. And his spacewalk was only like 12 minutes and 9 seconds or something like that, but very perilous. And you can see by this spacecraft, it was very well drawn. Of course, this is an artist's conception, but there were three astronauts in that little ball in the back there. So you can imagine how much room they had here to do this. And again, the first human to walk in space. And he and Kubasov were supposed to do a joint mission, Soyuz 11, but they suspected that Kubasov might have had tuberculosis, and both of them got didn't get to do the and they were just, I guess you could say it was fate, because the three people on that mission died. They're the only people that die in space. They went three cosmonauts went to the Salyut space station. They docked, and when they were preparing to come back, they lost pressurization in the cabin, and they all perished. Very sad. Kubasov was pretty well decorated himself as a cosmonaut, and all these people were all top notch. And Vance Brand, he was slated to go to the moon on Apollo 18, 19, and 20. They got scrapped, and he didn't get a chance to go. But he did pilot three space shuttle missions, and of course, he was in the Apollo-Soyuz test mission, and he was on the rescue team for Skylab 3 as well. And of course, he was the commander on the flight of this very special time when Bruce McCandless III became the first untethered astronaut to orbit the Earth and fly in space. And of course, here's the seven original astronauts. And I normally would ask everybody, can they name them? But of course, we're not doing this face to face. So we're going to Scott Carpenter to left to right, and on the following side, I'll just say Deke Slayton because he was one of the original. Gordon Cooper back to the left, and then John Glenn, Virgil Grissom, Wally Schirra, and of course the first American to fly in space, Alan Shepard. So talk about a guy who's done a lot of space flights and a seasoned veteran. Tom Stafford, he did Gemini 6A, Gemini 9, Apollo 10, and Apollo-Soyuz test mission. And this is going to be the first I interviewed, and I have lots of, oh goodness, lots and lots of audio from interviewing and talking to these astronauts. This was just before just before Mercury, I'll go back again, just before Gemini 9, I'll do that again. This is just before Gemini 9. And Deke Slayton finds out something. He tells something to Tom Stafford. I'm going to play that. So we'll play it later. And of course, here he is on Apollo 10. That's the dress rehearsal to the Apollo moon landing. This is a mock-up, of course, of the national. This is at the Udvar Hazy National Air and Space Museum, and Congress did appropriate the money to do this. Some people didn't like the idea. They thought we were going to give our secrets to the Soviets. Some people were okay with it. And basically a meaning of, this is the start of detente. But finally it did happen. And I talked to Vance Brand about it. He says, we're just about ready to phase out the Apollo capsule anyway. But anyway, it finally did happen. This mission was actually talked about in 1962 by President Kennedy and Khrushchev. And they talked about doing a joint mission, which surprised the heck out of me. And they were working on it, U.S. was, and Soviets. Of course, then things like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the assassination of John Kennedy and Khrushchev being taken out of his position in '64, the Cold War basically escalated. Kennedy did that same year, later in that year, wrote letters to Khrushchev asking about a joint mission to the moon, which I'm really surprised to learn about as well. But that didn't happen, of course, either because of political reasons. And back in 1970, that's when everything started up again, the talks to do a mission like this. And in 1975, it actually happened. Both spacecrafts launched on the same day, July 15th, 1975, just a few hours apart. They docked today. This is the 50th anniversary. And this is a lot of people say this is basically the symbolizing of this handshake between Alexei Leonov and Tom Stafford, the beginning of detente. Um, to say that Alexei and Tom Stafford became very good friends. Alexei named, I believe, his grandson after Alexei, and Alexei named his granddaughter after Tom Stafford's daughter. They hunted fish together. It was a relationship that they kept for a long time. In fact, Tom Stafford even spoke in Russia at Alexei's funeral.
Tensions between.
Oops. I'm going to play a little bit here. This is Vance Brandt talking about detente.
Tensions between the U.S. and Soviets were so high for so many years. Do you think that the mission symbolized detente between the two superpowers?
I think it was just part of detente, but it wasn't the whole story, of course. It was one piece to make detente work, and I thought it was very successful. Of course, our dealings with the Russians are completely different now, and it's a different ball game altogether. Back then, we found that the people we worked with were quite cooperative and talked with leaders in Russia and that sort of thing, and everyone was spring-loaded to make this work. And turned out their engineers and ours were putting into teams to make it work, and it did.
A little humor here, of course. Of course, this is 30 experiments, but there was lots of social activity as well. This is the Alexei offering, or just offering Deke Slayton vodka in the tube. Not sure if that really happened or not. Vance Brandt said it wasn't vodka, but who really knows? A little bit of humor there. One of the experiments that was done, and this was after the undocking, was that the Apollo spacecraft had made a total eclipse of the sun so that the Soviets can study the corona. I thought that was pretty cool. And that was one of the 5 experiments that they did together. And of course, they landed the Soviets mission finished on the 21st of July, and U.S. was on the 24th. And not without having problems. Every mission had problems. And I'm going to have Vance Brandt say something about what happened to him when they landed.
Kind of getting back to the mission had gone well. You'd done experiments with the Soviets and on your own as well, and everything went basically flawless until reentry. And during reentry, there were some toxic fumes that got into the cabin of the space capsule.
Yeah.
And you were actually unconscious for a period of time. What happened?
Well, during reentry at about 30 to 50,000 foot altitude, I forget which, we turned on an automatic system for putting parachutes out, getting rid of the nose cap that covered the parachutes and things like that. And we missed getting 2 switches at around, I don't know, probably 50,000 feet. And I say we, they were actually in front of my face. So I have to say I, but we were working as a crew. So anyway, we didn't catch it. And at some point shortly thereafter, I was looking for the automatic sequence to start putting out parachutes and all that. And it didn't happen. So I had been trained to manually do everything that the automatic system would do. And I did that. And we finally landed. And when we landed in the water, why, the spacecraft turned over such that the hatch and everything was underwater and the heat shield was on top of the water. And so that wasn't particularly abnormal. That happened on a certain number of missions, dependent on wave action and wind and things like that. So we got turned around, and some point in there, I was unconscious for about a minute, and that's because up to that time, why fumes had been coming into the spacecraft from the RCS jets, and the fumes were from RCS fuel, hydrazine, and so forth. My face was real close to the vent where the fumes were coming in. So, yeah, I passed out. Tom put an oxygen mask on my face, and I was awake again in about a minute. So that was quite an experience. It put us in the Tripler Hospital in Hawaii for about a week. And then we spent another week with our families at a nearby Marine Corps base and came home.
And so the end of an era of Apollo. Actually, the crew was nominated for a Nobel Prize some years later, but did not get it. I thought that was a kind of a special thing, but they didn't get it. So, of course, detente and the Cold War. We have to go back. If we're going to talk about Apollo, we've got to go back to the Cold War, and of course, the object that changed the world forever. I mean, amazing. And I'm old enough to remember it. I was pretty young, but from what I remember, Americans were scared. We thought that the Soviets were going to drop bombs on us. They were going to spy on us. Um, um, Everybody was worried. I know that I think the media called it the Sputnik crisis, and Congress was in gear to get things going to get something in space themselves. It's another, of course, but a few weeks later, of course, there's another picture of the Sputnik. They, the Soviets actually sent a dog into space. We hadn't even sent a rocket into space at this point, or satellite, I should say. And so they're way ahead of the game. But fortunately, a few months later, in January, Explorer was launched from the U.S. and there were many exploded rockets and rockets that didn't get off the ground until we got to this point. But it was a big plus for the U.S. and the space program. I love this picture. This is Pickering. He was the director of JPL. Van Allen, who was the physicist of Van Allen belts, are named after it, of course, von Braun. They're celebrating after the launch of the satellite. And I think one thing that was really cool is this satellite stayed in orbit. It only lasted, I think the batteries lasted a few months, but it was actually in orbit when we landed on the moon. I think it was orbit until 1970 or so. And of course, in July 29th of 1958, that's what this was, 1958 in January, the NASA was established. And so the space race continued. Of course, here we have all the astronauts. We've talked about the 7 original astronauts. Deke Slayton did not get to fly. He's the only one. He had a heart condition, AFib, and he didn't get to fly until Apollo-Soyuz, but everyone else did. And the race was on to have the first human in space. Well, Soviets did it again. April 12th, 1961. Yuri Gagarin, to me, this is just amazing. A full orbit around the Earth. The capsule is in this round capsule wasn't designed to land on the Earth and have a human live, so he had to jettison 7 miles above the surface after his one orbit. This gives a really good idea of how cramped he was and how he got to jettison out. And of course, here's the spacecraft. I read, I don't know how true it is, that he landed somewhere like 200 miles off course. I don't know how really true that is. Is that Soviets, they always talked about their successes, but they never talked about their failures. So, and of course, a huge victory for the communists at this point. Here's Khrushchev with Gagarin, and of course, showing that the East had technical superiority over the capitalist West and other capitalist countries. But close by, Alan Shepard did land, did go into space, I should say, the suborbital flight. May 5th, 1961. And the U.S. is tagging along and hanging in there, basically. Just a few weeks later, President Kennedy has a public address to the nation, and he says this. I think this is pretty amazing.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
Just one suborbital flight, and a few weeks later, he challenges the U.S. to go to the moon. Amazing. I spoke to Eugene Cernan about this. I remember as a kid listening to him. He said he had that thing about him, JFK, that when he said something and people believed him, and we did. Of course, Gus Grissom's flight really to be talked about. He was also suborbital. Of course, he had a problem with the hatch on the spacecraft, but just to say that, not to take away from what Gus Grissom, but the Soviets had already put another man into space who spent a whole day in space orbiting the Earth. And Gus Grissom was still doing the suborbital mission. And the hatch blew off. He denied always said that he didn't touch the button to blow the hatch. They couldn't save the spacecraft. It sank. He almost drowned also in the mix of it all. It was found out later on that years later that it was probably a radio signal that triggered the hatch to come off. And 38 years later, Liberty Bell 7 was recovered 100 miles off the coast and 3 miles below the surface. The Cosmosphere in Hutchinson, Kansas, and the Discovery Channel had a joint venture to bring it back, and they did. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Cosmosphere. It's on display there, but it also is loaned to other museums around the country, and you may get a chance to see it somewhere. They call it a tin can. I call it a tin piece of steel. It really wasn't much but steel in that thing. Amazing. And of course, John Glenn, February 20th, 1962. Again, my mom lets me stay home from school. I see it. I'm amazed. And as luck would have it, I get to meet John Glenn twice and talk to him. And I asked him, what happened? What were your concerns before the flight? And he said, well, my biggest concern was the Atlas D rocket was, had not enough lift to get me onto orbit. And this was going to be the first orbital flight. I know we've seen the movie Hidden Figures, and of course that was all figured out mathematically and shows John Glenn on a launch pad. It wasn't really done that way, but the human computers did figure it out. He did get into orbit and had a very perilous flight. I asked him what was his concerns during the flight, and he said to me that the biggest concern was that he knew something was going on. NASA wouldn't tell him that he had the problems he had. He knew they had problems. They just kept giving him the same thing to do over and over again. He was doing the same thing. So he felt that was very disturbing to him. He felt he was capable as a test pilot to know what was going on. But I also got to tell him that I used my dad's 56 Dodge station wagon as a Mercury capsule after his flight. He got a big kick out of that, and again, a big thrill for me. And of course, anyone who lives in the New York area knows this. This is from the '64 World's Fair, and I read different things, but the thing that I've read the most about what these three orbits are, and it sounds the most accurate, is that Gagarin, Glenn, and Telstar. And by the orbits themselves, it looks like a communication satellite, the first communication satellite, Telstar. So John Glenn gets to go back into space again, STS-95. This time he is the experiment again, but he also did some experiments on his own. He was very happy to go back. Scott Carpenter, I got to meet, another amazing individual, but he had real problems. And for what I've been told at NASA, he caused most of them himself, and that was running out of fuel. Didn't have, he had to manually fire his retro rockets. He had to really, they had to make the mission only 3 orbits because of all the problems he was having. And they were afraid they were going to lose him. He had a free fall, I think the largest free fall, 5,000 feet ever. I don't remember who was the newscaster at the time, thought that we might have lost an astronaut because we had lost, communications as we normally did, and it was for such a long time. But he did survive, and he landed somewhere 200 or more miles off course. Was picked up, and I got to meet him. Tony did the video of this, and what amazed me the most of him is that I can't play the video because there's so much the audio of the video because there's so much audio, the noise in the background that you wouldn't hear either one of us. And so I was telling him about the mission, and I think the thing that I thought was the I admired the most about him was that if the building fell down around us, he'd sit there like nothing happened. This guy he had just ice in his veins, ice water in his veins. A pleasure to meet. So just a few weeks before the end of the Mercury program, and of course the Soviets at this point had already put two spacecraft orbiting in space at the same time, not a rendezvous, but 2, and we still haven't got out of Mercury program. But JFK does his famous speech at Rice University. Again, he inspires the U.S.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
And so the Gemini program started, and a few months later, I talked to Tom Stafford about Gemini. He said, without Gemini, we never would have went to the moon. This is really the way of the American space program to get ready. Docking, rendezvous, spacewalks, duration in space, all those things were accomplished during the 10 Gemini flights, and I'm fortunate to be able to talk to some of the Gemini astronauts as well. But this day is etched in my memory as a kid and still is today. Ed White, the first U.S. astronaut to walk in space. The biggest problem with Ed White was he didn't want to come back in. His spacewalk was supposed to be 14 minutes. I think it wound up being 20. I did get the chance to talk to Jim McDivitt about it. He was the command module pilot. And he said to me, Ed had used all the fuel up in this device he had to bring him back to the spacecraft. So he had like a 23-foot tether and he had to pull him in. And the same problem that happened to Garrigan happened to Alexei Leonov with his suit getting larger and inflated happened to him. They had really real trouble getting Ed White back into the capsule. And he really thought he wasn't going to get him back in, but they did get him back in, closed the hatch, came back safely. And Jerry Griffin, who was mission control at the time, has a few words to say, which I really like to share with everybody about his flight.
I guess my favorite mission in Gemini was probably that Apollo or Gemini 4 with the EVA. I thought that was a big step to get outside that spacecraft in a suit. And if we could do that, we could get out on the moon and so forth and handle ourselves. And besides that, it was a great crew. McDivitt and White were 2 really nice guys, really fun to work with. When he had to get back in, yeah, he was having fun. And we were all, I can remember in the control center, and of course, I was not a flight director at that time, but I was sitting, the flight director was right behind me and very close. And almost as soon as he got out, there was people, let's get him back in, that's all we need to know, we've gone far enough. And he was having fun, and I don't blame him for wanting to stay out a little longer. But
And so, again, the first American walks in space. We seem to be catching up maybe on the Soviets. But this was, from what astronauts tell me, this was the day that, or the time that the U.S. felt that they passed the Soviets in the space race. And it came on a mission. The first mission was considered a failure. That was Gemini 6. And this was a rendezvous done with 6 and 7. I'm just going to go back and forth here. And of course, there's Tom Stafford and Sharad. They were on 6A, because they had a problem with the Gina rocket. I think it would either blew up, or the rocket that it was on crashed or whatever, blew up. And so they had nothing to dock to. That was the Gina rocket was kind of a way to practice docking maneuvers. And so Gemini 7 came along with Lovell and Borman, and they launched. And somebody finally said, "Hey, why don't we launch Gemini 6 and do this rendezvous?" And that's what they did. And I talked to Stafford about it. They said it was in Lovell. They said it was a lot, very simple. They didn't think this was a big deal. And this was the day that everybody felt we passed the Soviets. A failure turning into a great success, as NASA did many, many times. This is what the Gina rocket looked like, that they were going to dock to when they finally launched it. This is the picture that I was showing you before, and I tried to play the audio for. I believe it's going to work this time. And this is, of course, Gemini 9, probably the most hazardous flight in Gemini. And every one of these flights were perilous, and the NASA made them look like they were easy and seamless, but they weren't. And Tom Stafford told me that Deke Slayton came to talk to him just before the launch and had this to say to him.
You had a conversation with Deke Slayton just before the launch.
Well, we suited up in a trailer on pad 16. We had kind of a double mobile home, and you had a suit tech in your own room and suited up. I was about all squared away, nearly ready to put on my helmet, and Deke walked in and told the tech to get out. I got to talk to him. He shuts the door, said, "Tom, let me tell you," said, "this is going to be the first spacewalk completely around the world. It's going to be flying this Air Force experiment, this rocket pack, called the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit. And if anything happens to him, if he dies out there, we cannot afford to have a dead American astronaut floating out in space. You got to bring him back." I said, "What?" I said, "Deke, here it is about 2.5 hours before launch, and you're telling me this now?" I said, "Nobody has ever discussed that." So Deke was just sitting there with his eyes. Said, "What should I tell NASA management?" By then I was really pissed. So I said, "You tell them to remember that when the bolts explode and that Titan II lifts off, that I'm the commander, I'll make the decision." With that, I slammed down the helmet, stormed out of the room. And Gene had been waiting all this time outside with his tech. My tech joined me. We got in the van. There was no communications in those days between the two. Out to the pad, up the elevator. We finally got in the spacecraft. The first thing Gene said, "Hey, Tom, what was Deke talking to you about so long?" Thought for a second. I said, "Gino, he said he hoped we'd have a real good ride today."
I love that line. And it was basically what Gene Cernan said. They had lots of troubles. He called it the spacewalk from hell. And Tom Stafford said to me that basically the same thing that happened to the other astronauts. The suit inflated. Of course, now he's taking a full orbit around the Earth, and so they get to the darkness of the side of the Earth, and it's much colder, of course, and his visor fogs up, and so they're hoping that when they get back to the side of the Earth that's lit, that they will warm up and his visor would unfog. No, it didn't happen that way. And so Stafford also said to me, he says, "I learned about Newton's third law of motion because every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Every time I try to pull him in or move the spacecraft into position, he'd go slinging the other way." So he finally pulled him in. They had no such thing as like footrests or things to grab on to get back into the capsule. Again, had trouble closing the hatch. And from what Stafford told me, they had to depressurize the suit, and he sprayed him with water. He said he thought he was going to have a heart attack. He just thought that he's overheated. I got to spray him, and that's a no-no. And you're talking about in the space capsule and zero in the microgravity. But he did. They landed, and he basically saved Gene Cern's life. The Gemini 8, this is, of course, this is Dave Scott on the right, and of course Neil Armstrong on the left. And this flight was one that maybe you might have heard of. They went to dock with an Agena rocket. When they did, they went into a spin, and I got to talk to Dave Scott about that and ask him what happened. So Scott tells me, I'm talking to him, and I said to him, so what happened? He said, well, when I docked with the Agena, we immediately start to spin. He said, Armstrong said to me, you still docked to the Agena? He said, yeah. He goes, undock. So he said he undocked, and they started to spin faster. Armstrong said to him again, and he's kind of Dave Scott's showing to me like how he's working the control panel again. He said, are you sure we're undocked? He says, yeah. He says, we're undocked. So they went to a spin of like about a revolution per second, I think, at that time. And of course, Armstrong figures out what's going on. He pulls a circuit breaker. One of the thrusters, I think, was stuck. And I said to Scott, are you guys really ready to pass out? He says, yeah, another minute or two, I think we would have passed out. So a very shortened mission. He smiled and said, yeah, I had Neil with me. So I said, yeah, you must have been pretty disappointed. He goes, yeah, well, I got to walk on the moon. I said, yeah, that's not such a bad deal. And of course, they landed, emergency landing in the Pacific shortly after. And of course, I got to talk to Michael Collins quite a bit. And I got a little bit of humor. He was on Gemini 10, and I thought I'd share a little bit of humor. Michael Collins talking about an experience with him on Gemini 10.
Someone asked me pre-flight at a press conference before Gemini 10 about crew compatibility and its importance, and I said, hey, 3 days I'll fly with a baboon. And John Young is sitting right there, and the way it was, he took no offense at that whatsoever. Hell, he understood exactly what I was saying and was glad I said it. You know what I mean? So for 8 days to the moon and back, I would fly with a baboon. Yeah.
These are all the astronauts that flew. The group of astronauts when they were picked, which group they were picked in, and all the ones that flew in Gemini, and Gemini's was a success. We were ready to go to the moon, and start the Apollo program, but tragedy struck with Apollo 1, and White, Grissom, and Chaffee perished on the launch pad in the test in the Apollo 1 capsule. This was January 27th, 1967. I've talked to many people about what happened. It's such a tragedy. It's such a shame that because it could have been avoided, but it happened. And what the biggest problem was, from what Walt Cunningham told me, was that the capsule, there's of course this big rush to beat the Soviets to the moon. And there were delays, and the astronauts didn't like the way this capsule was being built, but the Apollo capsule, but they had nothing to say basically from the manufacturer. And so when there was a test, they pressurized the cabin of the command module, and to something like 15 or 16 psi, and the door opened in. And the other things is that there was none of the fabric in there was flame retardant or anything like that. And there was a spark, electrical spark. These guys were sitting in a capsule that was still being made and designed, and an explosion and a fire came. And of course, they tried to get out of the capsule. And the real sad part about this is, from what the astronauts tell me, is that they probably would have survived if the cabin wasn't pressurized, or if the door opened out like it did originally. And that got changed. There was more than 1,000 changes in the Apollo capsule before the next flight. And of course, Grissom, Young, and Chaffee will always be remembered. And of course, 21 months later, the first crewed flight of Apollo 7, was with Don Isley, Wally Schirra, and Walt Cunningham. I never got to meet the other two, but I did meet Walt several times and interview him. Him and other astronauts said, the tragedy of Apollo 1 really made it possible for us to get to the moon by the end of the decade. That's a sad thing, but that's the truth of it. 11 days in space. I don't know if I want to get cramped up 11 days in space, but they did the first live broadcast, television broadcast, the three of them. And I think what amazes me the most next is that we get three astronauts that fly 11 days in space on this capsule, and we decide we're going to send it to the moon. I talked to lots of people about this. The lunar module is not ready. Apollo 8 was supposed to be testing in orbit around the Earth of the lunar module, and it wasn't ready from Grumman yet. George Low, who was the chief engineer of Apollo, had the idea, let's go to the moon with the next flight. This was top secret. I think Borman knew long before Lovell and Anders did. And I got to talk to Jerry Bostwick. He was Mission Control at the time, and the director of Mission Control, Kraft, Chris Kraft, said to him, "Look, I want you to come with me. I want you to come to my office. I don't want you to tell anybody. It's Friday afternoon. I want you there. I got to talk to you. Don't tell anybody what you're doing." And so he goes to the office. He gets there, and Kraft says to him, "George Low wants to take Apollo 8 to the moon." He says, "That's crazy." And he said, Kraft said, "Don't say that. That's what I told George Low." He says, "I got to know by Monday if we can really do this. You got to tell me." So he and a couple of other engineers and people from the NASA program, very few, on Monday morning came in and said, "Yeah, we could do this." Amazing. And of course, Jerry Griffin has something to say about it I want to share with everybody.
Gutsy call. That was a gutsy call. And the Saturn V test flight right before 8 had two big problems. One of them was POGO, the structural resonation with the engines that caused an engine to shut down, a stage, I guess, to shut down early. And then the S4B, the third stage of the vehicle, didn't get a restart when it should have. And without any further testing, they went to the moon on the next flight. And that was basically a George Low call based on the people at Huntsville who built the Saturn. Said, "We know what caused both of those problems, and we can fix it." And he said, "You think you can?" And he said, "We know we can." And again, there's that trust that I spoke of, and it was a gutsy call, though, by any measure, probably the gutsiest call that made within the program ever. And it, for all intents and purposes, we didn't know it at the time, but the space race was over when Apollo 8 flew. We hadn't landed yet, but about that time is when they had, in something we didn't know about, the Soviets had an explosion on their pad. They lost their big rocket and lost several people, and they were kind of wiped out. And we didn't wish that on anybody, and we didn't know about it until later years. The CIA knew about it, but we didn't. But Apollo 8 was that huge step that essentially got us on the right track, and we were going to the moon now.
Amazing. Three guys get on a rocket that really hasn't proven itself without a problem and go to the moon. And of course, the first humans to see the backside of the moon, as we call it as astronomers, not the dark side of the moon. And of course, the iconic picture taken by Anders here. I talked to Jim Lovell. I asked him, what orbit was this that you saw the Earth rise? I was kind of interested in that. He said, "Well, we didn't see it on the first. I think it just might have been the third orbit or something." He said, "The command module was pointing back away from the Earth. We flipped it around, and this is what we saw for the first time when we flipped it around. And Anders got the great shot. And I don't know if anybody can remember this, but you know, when they read from Genesis on Christmas Eve, this was shown all over the world. I think at the time it was for many years, it was the most viewed live broadcast in history. I don't think that is anymore, but I got to tell you, on that day, I felt like, you know, we're all here on the planet Earth, and this is who we are, not what country we live in. Yeah, very, very inspiring. And Jim Lovell, I got to talk to him, of course, and he told me a little about what he thought about Apollo 8.
Quite apropos that we were able to do Apollo 8 on Christmas Eve and be around the moon on Christmas Eve. And when you think about 1968, which maybe a lot of your listeners don't realize that the 1968 was not a very pleasant year in the United States. Things were going on. War was going on, of course, an unpopular war. Assassinations, riots were going on. And I feel very proud to do the one thing at the end of the year that was positive for everybody.
And of course, the next flight would be the testing, of course, of the lunar lander. They tested it in Earth orbit. This was McDivitt again, of course, Dave Scott, and Rusty Schweiger and Scott went to the moon. These guys both were veterans. I think this was Rusty Schweiger's maybe first and only flight, if I remember recall. But they did the deal. They docking, maneuvering the LEM. And of course, what are we going to do next? You try the LEM out once, right? It works, right? Okay, we're going to send it to the moon. Yeah. Apollo 10, the dress rehearsal for the Apollo 11 lunar landing. And here's the three astronauts. Again, three real veterans here: Gene Cernan, John Young, and Tom Stafford. They had their problems as well when they were coming back to ascending back to the spacecraft. That was in orbit. They didn't land, of course. They went down to, I think, 9.6 miles from the surface. They took pictures of the landing site. And I always recall talking to some people from NASA saying, like, hey, you know, could they land this thing if they wanted to? And I asked that to Stafford. He said, no, they made the ascent stage too heavy, and they didn't give us enough fuel. And I think Slayton or somebody would said, but way back, you know, don't give these guys the opportunity to land because they just might. And when I talked to Cernan, he was itching to land. Yeah. But successful. They pulled out of a spin. When they ascended, they went right into orbit like they should have, docked with the command module, and came back home. Apollo 11, yeah. Of course, everybody remembers Apollo 11. I didn't get to meet at all Neil Armstrong. That's a very sad thing for me, but that's why it happened. Of course, I met the other two a few times, and got to talk to them, which was great. And so whoops, wrong way. So I wanted to have something that Mike Collins said that I thought was pretty interesting about the three Apollo astronauts before the launch.
Well, I described this in the book as we were amiable strangers, and I didn't mean that in a derogatory way. It was kind of a combination of things. The two most important factors were, like, unlike a lot of the crews, we had never been together as a backup crew a year or so before. I could go like practically a whole week and not even see Neil or Buzz. They'd be off in their New York, up visiting Grumman. I'd be in California with North American, blah, blah, blah.
And so Neil Armstrong's practicing a few months before before Apollo 11. This is the LLRV. This is the way lunar module pilots learned how to land on the moon. It's kind of a crazy contraption and very dangerous, as you can see. And this is what happened to Neil. Some of you might have seen this in the movie. It went out of control just before it spun over. He was able to jettison out and land. Yikes! Almost in the fire. And so, from what I understood. I spoke to Alan Bean and of course Walt Cunningham about this. About he actually went back in the movie. They show him going home and he's all beat up and all. But basically, what he did was he went back to his office to do work, and I kind of confirmed that with Walt.
Is it true that after Neil Armstrong's accident, his near-death accident on the lunar lander trainer, that he actually went back to work in his office to do paperwork afterwards?
Yeah, the movie makes that one look pretty bad, and he's all kind of scarred up. My office was right next door to Neil's, and Alan Bean was in my office. I don't remember what we were talking about at the time, but I think we called flight ops. They said that Neil had to eject because of the failure in the lunar landing trainer. And I said, no, it couldn't have happened. He's here in the office right next door. And I said, yes, it did. So Alan and I, we stuck our head in there, and there was Neil sitting down going through his paperwork and filling some stuff out. And we had to check with him to confirm that, yes, he had ejected about an hour earlier.
Is it?
Neil was said that he had work to do. That's why he went back to the office, from what other people have told me. Launch day, all right? This was biggest thing in world history, one of the biggest, of course. And I have a video of the landing here. And of course, the launch went very well. And this is on the right side. There's kind of split screen here, but you'll see the lunar orbiters now that are going around the LRV, and the other ones and the Japanese ones have done a much better video of what the surface looks like. On the left, they'll show you what the NASA looked like. I'm going to play this whole thing. It's about 3 minutes or so, but it's worth watching and listening to. And not all the errors. They had real problems when landing at this 1201 and 1202 errors. They're running out of fuel. I interviewed Steve Bales. He's the one who got those errors. He was on the team to land, and he said that they did get 12 errors in simulations, but never 1201 and 1202. And this is how this whole thing worked. The 400,000 people that helped on this thing. He called somebody in the back room, and they called someone at MIT who wrote the program for that, and basically said, hey, this error is an overflow. The computers are bogged up, and it's just an overflow error, and everything's okay. That happened every 2 minutes because it happened in a cycle. But at every 2 minutes later, Steve Bales gave the go. And of course, you hear that it's 60 seconds and 30 seconds. That's how much fuel is left. And believe it or not, the fuel at the end is the 60 seconds countdown was done by a stopwatch. It went off computer, and Bob Carlson, who did the very calm talking to land during the landing. And of course, they found this big boulder field where they were supposed to land, and so Armstrong does this maneuver, like he tilts the LEM back and goes forward and goes over the boulder field and comes down with just enough gas left in the descent engine. Of course, the ascent engine has gas, but you can't swap back and forth. And so you can imagine dropping an object just 10 feet from the ground with no fuel left in it. So here we go.
Eagle, you're looking great. Coming up 9 minutes.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Altitude 5,200 feet.
Manual attitude control is good. Roger, copy.
Altitude 4,200.
Houston, you're a go for landing, over. Roger, understand. Go for landing. 3,000 feet. Copy. Alarm. 1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm. Where go? Same type. Where go? 2,000 feet. 2,000 feet. Into the ag, 47 degrees. Roger. 47 degrees. Eagle looking great. Your go.
Altitude 1,600. 1,400 feet, still looking very good.
Roger, 1202, we copy it. 35 degrees. 35 degrees, 750, coming down to 23. 700 feet, 21 down, 33 degrees. 100 feet, down at 19. 540 feet, down at 30, down at 15. Okay, 400 feet, down at 9. Gate forward. 10 and 50 feet, down at 4. 33 and a half down. They're pegged on horizontal velocity. 300 feet down, 3.5. 47 forward. Hold up. Down 1.5 down. 70. Got the shadow out there. 50 down at 2.5. 19 forward. Altitude, velocity, light. 3.5 down. 220 feet. 13 forward. 11 forward, coming down nicely. 200 feet. 4.5 down. 5.5 down. 160 feet. 6.5 down. 5.5 down. 9 forward. Good. 120 feet. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. 5%. How many bite? Okay, 75 feet. Car's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. That's 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Great shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 20, down a half. 30 seconds. Forward. Just. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ACA at a descent. Nose control both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. Thank you. You're looking good here. Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
And you can see how close they landed to this crater. Amazing. I know we're getting close to an hour here, but I got a little more to go. I'm going to play this. This is Charlie Duke, who was, of course, he was on Capcom of Mission Control when this all happened. And I'd like to hear what he said to say.
However, like any other flight, something happens in the last few seconds, and you either kill the crew or abort the mission. And all of those possibilities are there, but you don't worry about them. Yeah, that's success. You're focused on success, and so that's, I think, the whole of Mission Control, and all the crew, of course, were I call it bore-sighted on success, and we were going to pull this off at all possible. So we didn't take any risk that weren't within the mission rules. We had a whole book full of mission rules that we were to abide by. And one was that abort at a certain fuel level. I think it was 4% remaining in the descent tanks. But as I said earlier and explained, 20 feet off the ground, use that fuel to land instead of aborting. So that's the decision. We didn't get there, but I'm sure had I said Eagle abort, it would have been, say again, Houston, didn't come in clearly or something. So, and I would have landed if I were the commander.
And of course, the big step.
Getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up.
Roger, we copy.
It's a pretty good little jump.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Neil, we can see you coming. Okay, I just checked. Getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Sorry, we had a little freeze there, but you all know what happened in the video. Of course, this is the very famous picture taken by Armstrong to Buzz Aldrin. They only spent a little over 2 hours on the surface. This is a baseball field, just to show you what area they covered. And of course, they quickly tried to get some samples. Neil Armstrong did when he first stepped onto the moon, and they found that everything was relatively safe. But again, the whole theory was, the whole gist was, to get them back safely to Earth, and that's what they did. And of course, this is what they left on the moon. But as just before they were leaving, talking about problems, they noticed that a circuit breaker that is used for the ascent engine was broken. The actuator was broken on it, and they called Mission Control. Mission Control was trying to find a fix for it. And without the ascent engine, they're not going anywhere. And one thing I want to really mention about the ascent engine, it never could get tested. It only got tested once, and that's when you used it, because it would destroy itself every time it was used. So these guys were sitting on something that was never tested before to get off the moon. So Aldrin finally says, they try to get some sleep. He says, no, forget that. He takes his pen, he puts a piece of tape around it, he pushes it through onto the circuit breaker to actuate it. Now they got the power, and they launch, and they take off, and they come back home. Amazing. And of course, first couple of flights were quarantined. There's President Nixon. The next flight, 12, you talk about three guys that were amiable strangers. These are three guys that were real buddies. Pete Conrad, Dick Gordon, and Al Bean. They were great friends, and they went on the mission together. Of course, there was a problem again. Apollo 12 got hit by lightning at launch. And John Aaron, who was at Mission Control, found the fix and had a very short period of time, of course, to do it. And he gave that information to Alan Bean, and Alan Bean's going to explain it.
It was an obscure switch, and I don't think we'd ever used that switch in training all those years. We backed up Apollo 9. We didn't use it there, and we used it, well, that was the one time we used it on Apollo 12. So we found the switch and threw it. The hero of that launch was Pete Conrad, because he had to make a decision whether to abort. He was getting indications that we were going off course, but he was also getting a seat-of-the-pants feeling that we weren't, and so he held on and did not abort, and we went into orbit and got everything going after that. It worked out fine.
Yeah, that was Jerry Griffin's first as a flight director's first. But after that fix by John Aaron and bypass the bus till he can get things working, I think that was the only real issue, really, which is amazing. And so everybody knows Apollo 13. The explosion stirred the cryogens after they had a live broadcast back to the Earth that none of the TV stations picked up. And of course, We know the story. Jerry Jerry Griffin told me that the biggest problem they thought was basically the power. There weren't enough power to slingshot when they decided to slingshot around the moon and come back. But the problem was really water. And Fred Hayes got a bladder infection, I believe, from not drinking water purposely, of course, and had problems. But Mission Control did it again. On every mission, there was anomalies and problems, and they brought everybody back safely. The unsung heroes. I got to talk to this Glenn Lunny, and this was at the Tony Achilles took this nice picture for me while we were there, and this is the 45th anniversary of Apollo 13. You can see Jack Lausma. He was on Capcom, I believe, during the explosion. Jim Lovell next to Glenn, Jerry Griffin, and of course Fred Hayes there in the corner there on the left. Quite an honor. But I thought was the most thing about one of the most memorable things that someone has said to me, an astronaut, about the Apollo mission, was what Fred has said about when I asked him this question about Apollo 13.
At any time during the mission, any part of the rescue mission, did you ever think about the odds of returning safely to the Earth?
I don't know how to compute odds. No, you know, it was true of me testing airplanes, and same way of approaching a flight like that. You have no guarantee you'll get back before you even leave. When you leave, you have no guarantee. In fact, we normally prepared that way, and same way in fighter squadrons, you normally had a designee. In my case, a fellow named Jerry Carr that lived in the neighborhood. And actually, I would have gone back and landed on the moon on Apollo 19, had we flown 19. But Jerry, I had invited over to my house, and I went through all the insurance papers and stuff he would have to worry about should I not get back. So he was there to, help out the family and the wife in that eventuality, which is pretty standard practice if you're in a fighter squadron.
And of course, Apollo 14, after 13, and of course 13 didn't land on the moon, but from 14 on, these missions were more focused towards science, which was a great thing. Instead of the Cold War, I think the British realized the Soviets weren't going to beat them to the moon. And of course, there's Ed Mitchell, Alan Shepard, first American walk in space, and Stuart Roosa. And so, again, I got to meet Ed Mitchell. They had their problems landing too. They had circuit breaker problems. They weren't sure whether they were going to be able to land. Mission Control figured out all the problems they had, and I got to meet and interview Ed Mitchell, and he liked his interview so much he invited me to his home. That's the actual. I think the family auctioned that off to somebody at this point, but that was the control he had on lunar module to land up 14 on the moon. But I got to tell you, out of all the people I met, Apollo astronauts, and all the astronauts are all very bright people, and he really seemed to be the brightest of the brightest. A very unusual guy. He, believer in believer in UFOs, and had his own opinion about Area 51. He performed ESP in the command module on the way to the moon and the way back. Also a very kind soul, and with my interview with him is the most listened to interview that I put on the internet from memory. He's just certainly a unique person. And so he brings us around his house, and Tony Achilles, my colleague at PKN, and I was there with him, and we talked, and he starts bragging about this first Lunar Olympics, and I was like, wait a minute, you got all these things about the moon on there, and if you take a look at this picture, you'll see a golf ball, of course, and you can know that Shepard hit the golf ball on the moon, and you can see this, looks like a stick, that was what Ed Mitchell called a javelin. I'm going to let you listen to what he had to say.
You and Alan Shepard performed some of your own experiments on the moon with a golf club and a javelin.
That was fun. That was his little experiment, and he had talked it over with Deke Slayton, and the guys at Houston and the management at Houston, and I knew about it, so it wasn't unknown. And so when he hit his golf ball, in an impromptu fashion, I grabbed the staff from the solar wind experiment, which had already taken the experiment, which was kind of a window shade like thing, rolled it up, put it in the data bag, and I used the staff, which was just a long pole, as a javelin and threw it after his golf ball. And I have proved my makeshift javelin went about 6 inches further than his golf ball. So the first Lunar Olympics was one golf shot and one javelin throw, and I won by about 6 inches.
I wonder if Alan Shepard was here today, whether he would dispute that or not.
he never liked that at all. That I had an impromptu action and then picked up the staff and used it as a javelin and threw it after. It was very impromptu, and threw it after his javelin, and it went about 6 inches further than his golf shot. He did not appreciate that, and reminded me of it all along. But we were good friends, so it worked.
Apollo 14, Dave Scott, who was on Gemini 8, of course, with Neil Armstrong, and two rookies. They went to the moon, and of course, they had their problems too. This did I say 14? I'm sorry. Apollo 15. Sorry. The first mission with the moon buggy, and Jim Irwin was on the lunar lander with Jay Scott, and Al Worden on the right there was in the command module. They had their issues, but EVAs and collecting soil and drilling. These guys really became exhausted with some of the stuff they had to do. They did some really hard work. And I don't have a picture of it, but this is one of my favorites is when Dave Scott took the feather and the hammer and dropped them on the moon to show Galileo was proving Galileo's object falling at the same rate would work anywhere in the universe. It's pretty cool. And of course, there's Al Worden. He talk about a great guy, and he told us many, many stories that I would like to share with you, but not today. And this is Apollo 16. Ken Mattingly, who was bumped from again, as I mentioned, from Apollo 13 because he had been with Charlie Duke, who had the measles. So then he got his chance to go with John Young and Charlie Duke, who I've met several times. Of course, you've seen Charlie Duke here. Same thing. They had their problems, and their biggest problem was that when they separated from the command module, they had a problem with the command module, and it couldn't get into the proper orbit for them to spend enough time on the moon to come back in and dock with the command module. So I'll let Charlie Duke explain what happened.
We were down in the pits emotionally. We trained all this time. We 8 miles away. We 1 hour away from landing, and now get yourself ready to come home. We're in a void. But fortunately, Mission Control saved the day, and I'll say it till the day I die. Mission Control was the unsung heroes of Apollo. They saved the day on every mission, and did it admirably. So anyway, they took them 4 hours, but they figured out a workaround and then gave us a go for landing. So 6 hours later, Mattingly burns his engine, then we land, and mission success. But without them and the courage to make a decision was on the part of Kraft and the others that were there, and the flight directors, so Jerry Griffin was our landing flight director. So anyway, it all worked out, and NASA made some really bold decisions and right decisions during Apollo.
So the last 3 Apollo missions are canceled. The last mission will be Apollo 17. You can see Apollo 18 here. It's Dick Gordon, who was up on Apollo 12. You can see that Vance Brand was slated to be on Apollo 18, and Jack Harrison Schmitt was the lunar module pilot. But we all know that Jack Schmitt went to the moon. And here's the reason why. He was the only geologist left when those three missions were canceled. And Joe Engle, who was supposed to be the lunar pilot, got bumped to 18, which wasn't going to fly. And Jack Schmitt went to the moon. This is Schmitt, Evans, of course, and Gene Cernan. Apollo 17 last to the moon. And I did get to speak to both Cernan and to Schmitt. Amazing mission, and of course, Schmitt had a lot to say about the geology of the moon to me. And one thing most people don't realize is that the Skylab missions were also Apollo missions, and they were used for the used Apollo surplus stuff left over from Apollo. I think these missions were amazing. They got really bad press when they really started, when they happened. When the Skylab rocket took off, part of the meteorite shield got pulled off, and there was a problem, and the heat was getting into the spacecraft and the module, and they had to figure out a fix on ground to fix it, which they did, and Kernan and there's of course Pete Conrad and Weitz. They were on the mission. Here's the problem. Here's the part that they had to cover. They made these things up on the Earth. It's amazing. They brought them up. They installed them. The temperature went down from like 100 and some odd degrees down to like, whatever room temperature should be up there. Some very hazardous spacewalks to do repairs to the solar panels as well. They did a bunch of science as well, solar viewing, medical medical studies as well. Now there's a little confusion between Skylab 1, 2, and 3, because Skylab 1 would be the first, it would be the launch. Skylab 2 would be the first crewed member. So this would be Skylab 3. You'll see the back and forth 2 and 3 sometimes. But I actually got to meet Owen Garriott, of course, Jack Lausma, and Alan Bean, all of them. They had the problem with the thrusters once they got there. They have to say that, and they thought there was going to have to be a rescue mission to come get them. Two of the four thrusters, one had a leak and one wasn't working right. These are steering mechanisms to get them back, of course, in orbit around back to the Earth. When I interviewed each one of them or talked to them, I got to say that not one of them ever mentioned that they were in trouble. Never, ever mentioned about a rescue mission or anything like that. And I wanted to show this picture, of course, because Owen Garriott's son, Richard, this is the first astronaut son, U.S. astronaut son and father. He flew as a space tourist with the Soviets. And of course, here's Vance Brand. I spoke to him today, 94 years old. He's the only living member of the Apollo-Soyuz Test Project. And it was Don Lind they were going to do the rescue mission. They had the rocket on the launch pad. They were redesigning the Apollo capsule to bring the other three members back. But guess what? Mission Control found a workaround, and they didn't have to do the rescue mission. This is how spacious the Skylab was itself. And here they did some repairs. If I get forward to, sorry about that. So that was basically the end of, really the end of Apollo was the Apollo-Soyuz Test Project, which I talked about first. But I go back to the memories of getting to meet John Glenn, my mom letting me stay home from school, the memories of Ed White walking in space, all these wonderful people that made it possible for me to give these stories to me. I wish I could have the time to play everything that they've told me. I don't have it. The mission control guys that seem to save the day all the time. All of them were great. One thing that Ed Mitchell said, I asked him this, and to me, this was probably the most moving thing that anybody has said to me from Apollo. The last question I have, this is one that is a personal question. When you look up at the moon after making that incredible journey from the Earth, of course, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I feel very pleased that I was selected to be one of the early explorers of the moon. And it was an exploration. And of course, we humans are explorers. I came from a family of explorers. They went west after the Civil War in the 1870s to go to the west when Texas and New Mexico were still not even states at that point, to live out there. And I grew up in that area, including being in Roswell when that took place. And so we have to, at this point, recognize that we are the species on a planet that has a finite life ahead of it, and we have to govern ourselves accordingly and learn to protect what we have and to start to live in a sustainable way and protect it in a sustainable way. And that's going to take all of us doing it. If sustainability is to be realized, let it begin with me, each one of us.
So I want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to share all this history with everyone from the Apollo program. Thanks for having me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Andy. That was wonderful. That was wonderful history. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thanks for.
Yeah, go ahead.
I stumbled a lot because I tried to finish this because I knew it wasn't going to take a little more than an hour. So my apologies for all that.
That was worth it. I enjoyed it. It was really wonderful. Thank you. There are no questions in the chat, and we'll have a few participants. So I'm just going to say, if somebody has a question, feel free to raise your hand. And you can do so by going into at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I believe it's the React, and you can pull up or raise your hand. If not, thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Andy, for being here. So we'll give it a few minutes, see if anyone has a question.
Great. Thank you very much as well. My pleasure.
So I have a question, if you don't mind. My name is George Priotasa. What do you think we're going with Artemis? Do you see any parallel, or on the contrary?
With Artemis?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I talked to Jerry Griffin very, very frequently. Of course, he was on, flight director, and he was on many mission control missions. And all the people that have the information to give, most of them are passed, or they're not, they're not available. Most of them have passed. And so there's this plethora of information that he wants to share with NASA, and he does. But of course, technology's changed. As Jerry's told me, these people are very bright to go, and of course, there's a lot more is automated today. But landing on the moon is still difficult, and you can notice that when these commercial companies have sent things to the moon, and whether it's our country, come from our country, or Israel or Japan or whatever, they have a tough time landing on the moon. And so Artemis, I just think that they're going to have to learn some on their own, and just like Apollo did. Is it going to be the same as Apollo? My hopes are that we're going back for humanity this time, and before it was the Cold War. Of course I see the similarities. There are many differences, but I think, I'm hoping that, of course, we don't know what's going to happen with budgetary things these days, but
all right.
I hope that we continue to go to the moon and then to Mars. I hope that happens. I hope that answers your question. I don't know if it does or not.
Well, so in my astronomy club, people are kind of, old folks like me and you, and remembering everything like you do, and they're kind of lamenting things are, how could they do it back then, and now we're kind of, having problems, and the Artemis program seems to be so complicated, and so on.
Well,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, I think it is more complicated because it's more automated. So there are more things. But I know I agree with you. Like you think that okay, these are all switches and primitive computers. So what can go wrong? You think a bunch of things can go wrong, but maybe with automation, it's also that way as well. And we haven't practiced or tried to go back to the moon in many years. So I think
yeah,
it's back to the learning experience without the people who went to tell them, hey, here's what happened to us.
yeah,
Yeah. And part of it's budgetary, of course. The I think we spent 5 cents on a dollar on the budget during Apollo. I think it's less than half a penny at this point, and that includes missions that aren't even manned missions. So, and that's looks like it's going to change again. So, what NASA has and the commercialization of space, seem to have been a perfect marriage. I don't know. I can't tell you what's going to happen, only that I hope that this becomes this perfect marriage between commercialization and what NASA has, and it all comes out. But again, I don't think anybody has the know-how to do this thing since it never went.
yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for a question. Anyone else?
There's a question from Julia. Oh, sorry, I just moved it. Sorry, I got to move this back to my space here. Question from Julia wanting to characterize the privatization of space. Is that the right move in your opinion?
Yeah.
And then any thoughts on space junk and keeping space clean?
Yeah, those are two things that I think about all the time. That's a great question. Um, as far as commercialization, I think everybody's for it. NASA's for it. In fact, NASA was ready to hand over everything in low Earth orbit in the next couple of years was all going to go to commercialization. And actually, also, NASA and other countries know that this is a very expensive deal to go back to the moon, right? And we want to have a presence there. We want to stay there. So the expense is incredibly high, and this gives commercial companies a chance to do things that NASA doesn't, or we don't have the money to do. So I think that in that case, that it's become, and everybody seems to think this. All the people I talk to, from either NASA or even astronauts, thinks it's a perfect marriage. The issue then becomes, though, is that what's going to happen with NASA's budget? What's going to happen, totally with everything? And is it only going to be low Earth orbit, or is it going to be going back to the moon? I mean, even what is it? Blue Origin, SpaceX are making stuff to go back to the moon. So it's an expensive endeavor, and I personally think that it really needs to happen, or else we're not going to go. As far as space junk, yeah, I spoke to Eileen Collins in depth about that on the interview I had with her, and I also talked to Bruce McCandless III. That's Bruce McCandless's son, about space junk, and Emily Carney about their book. And basically, I said to him, what are we going to do about this stuff? And so it is one of the biggest problems in low Earth orbit is space junk. It's one of the biggest hazards. The problem is that nobody wants to pay the money to clean it up, from what Eileen Collins tells me. And who's going to take care? It's junk from everybody, from all these different countries. I'm hoping that someone devises something, and that people have done this, something that would kind of attract everything and then bring it down to an orbit that would burn up into the Earth's atmosphere. It sounds kind of simple, but today, at this point, there is no project that I know of that Eileen Collins told me about that is going to take care of space junk. I hope I answered that your question.
So we have one more question. I think it's a great question to end on. It's a question for you. Maybe one more just came in. Nope. And this is from Zoe, and it's of your interviews. Which one made you most think, I'm so glad I recorded this for posterity?
That's a great question. I can't tell you, Zoe, how many times I had tears in my eyes when I some of these interviews. And Fred Hayes talking about being a fighter pilot and never knowing whether you're going to come home. And I didn't put the thing about Gene Cernan. He talked about standing on the platform of the LEM and being the last person to be on the moon, and his talking about what the Earth's just hanging there. Some really emotional stuff that I'd say there's more than one. But and so I feel blessed overall to be able to communicate not only with the astronauts but the mission control and engineers and people that were involved in this thing. But yeah, I mean, it's more than one. If that's the question. Yeah.
That's a good way to end. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the great questions.
Thank you.
I hope you have a wonderful night, and thank you all for joining us. And I hope to see you all again at our next event.